Um, Hello, everybody. My name is Simon Henry. I'm from France, and today I'll talk about how I made a spectrogram in Blender using geometry nodes. So first, a bit about me. First, a bit about me. So I'm currently working as a 2D supervisor animator at Caribara Angoulême. I was lucky enough to work on two Blender projects called Sam and Julia, whose museum is right here in Amsterdam, and Big Lizard, all made in Blender. The idea came from the desire to make a music visualizer. Here are some examples I found on YouTube. The idea is always to make images that react to sound. These are experiments I made on this project before. So the one on the left is a visualization of a MIDI file. And the other one is more technical. It's a way to visualize different frequencies in a single sound, inspired by the great YouTube channel 3 Blue 1 Brown. First, I'll explain what a spectrogram is. Then I will explain the different parts that compose the prototype I made. Then I will I will show you how I made the add-on for this. The add-on is called Sound to Mesh, because it's an add-on to make a mesh from a sound. And finally, I'll share some tips I've learned along the way. So first, what is a spectrogram? So my slides are a bit out of order, but this was the signal. And the visual representation of it is, Wikipedia says that the spectrogram is the visual representation of the frequencies of the signal. So this is one way to represent the signal I've just played. It represents the amplitude of the signal of the time. It's called a waveform. But this is not what I use. I use a spectrogram, which represents the amplitude of the range of all the frequencies that compose the signal. So you can see the frequency is on the vertical axis. So at the bottom, you have the low sounds, low-pitched sound. At the top, you have the high-pitched sounds. And the brightness of the pixel represents the amplitude of each frequency. So how does the spectrogram in the prototype works? I first use a base grid that I displace using the image. And you can see that the bright parts of the texture is where the displacement is the highest. Then I just take the texture and I scroll it under the plane to make it look like it moves at the same rhythm as the spectrogram, as the sound. Sorry. This is the first part of the prototype, is the spectrogram mesh. Then you also need a waveform that gives a more immediate response, a visual response to what you're hearing. So with the waveform, you can better see what parts of the spectrogram are moving. The last part this is an example with a more complex sound. So this music was made by the same person who made the flute I just used to play the first signal. Can I skip it? Yeah. The last part of the spectrogram, so of the prototype, is the shader. I don't use the base texture of the shader of the image to work on the shader. Instead, I used the height gradient of the spectrogram mesh. It allows me to, this gradient is way more clean and smooth than the base texture. And I can use it to choose which color I put on the spectrogram. One key thing I understood along the way while making different shaders, that is I needed to have good contrast between 3 different parts of the spectrogram. The ridges at the top need to have good contrast with the slopes under it, and the valleys also need to have good contrast with the parts above it for some parts of the spectrogram to stand out. So this is an example I made. So the top ridges do stand out against the slopes. Another example, more extreme, with dark valleys. Another one. So here you have different examples with each time the ridges having a good contrast with what's under it. Now that I had a working prototype, way to make shaders, I could start having fun. So I will show you the different iterations I made of the spectrogram, starting from the very beginning. This was the very first test. It wasn't dynamic at all. It had very bad control, but it was kind of working. This one, I made it because I thought that these little ridges look like mountains, so I wanted to try and reflect that. I tried using different types of music. So this is a fast music that is more dynamic than others. This is another example with a very slow music. The idea was to reflect the vibe of the music in the shader. So this is an electronic music, so I made some kind of neon shader to reflect that. This is the first finished, polished version of the spectrogram, I guess. The idea was to make some kind of magic music machine that would represent paper stripes moving and deforming when the music was being played. After this, I started having fun with the shape of the spectrogram. So I started by deforming it along an arc to mimic some kind of magic vinyl being played on a turntable. I tried having it deformed along a tube on the exterior of the tube. And at that point, I had a friend with me who suggested I put the spectrogram on the inside of the tube, which looks like this. This was key in the development of this add-on, because for the first time, I had the opportunity to put the camera inside the spectrogram. This meant I was able to have the spectrogram take much more screen space than before and make a more interesting audio visualizer. So I will show you some examples that I've made after this artistic discovery. So sometimes I instanced some geometry. So for this one, I instanced small little spheres at the top of the ridges, always trying to have good contrast with the ridges, slopes, and valleys, literal valleys. This was inspired by some kind of topographic maps to have topographic lines to show the slopes and ridges. So now I will talk about the add-on. It's called Sound to Mesh, once again. And first, I will explain how I used FFmpeg to automate the spectrogram creation. So at first, I was using Audio Alter. It's a very good website. It allows you to make spectrograms for free. So you can just put your sound on the website, generate the spectrogram, download the spectrogram, put it inside of Blender. It was working, but it was way too long to do, to change the spectrogram. So I automated it with FFmpeg. So FFmpeg is a free and open source audiovisual software. It's the cornerstone of many, many audiovisual projects, and mine is no exception. I didn't use the whole of FMPEG, just one function called show spectrum pic. It's to show the picture of a spectrum. I wanted to better understand the function to be sure I got the most out of it. I won't go too much into detail, but I will focus on 3 parameters I tried to understand to make better spectrograms. So the first one is the spectrogram color. FMPEG gives us 15 image gradients to choose from. They're all pretty, but I didn't know which one was the best. After some testing, I understood it didn't matter, because Blender uses the luminance of the image to calculate the displacement. So the hue, color have not that much of an impact on it. It will only use the luminance to calculate the displacement. In the end, I stuck with the default one called intensity, which looks cool. Then the volume limit. A problem I had was that for very faint sounds, I had very low brightness on the spectrogram image being generated. This meant I was losing some data, some information about the sound. To fix this, I used another function of FMPEG to get the maximum volume of the sound, input it in the first function, and this gave me always maximum brightness on the image. So this meant that no matter the volume of the sound, I would always get the maximum brightness and all the information. And lastly, so this is the most complicated part, the frequency range. FMPEG allows us to make, this is not the right version, but it will work. FMPEG allows us to make 2 frequency distributions for the same sound. So this is the normal one. And you can also make a logarithmic distribution. This means the image gets distorted to take more space for the low values, and the high pitch values are all scrambled at the top of the spectrogram. I didn't know which of the distributions was best. I could make one or the other for the same sound. Sorry, my slides are a bit out of order. So what I did was, I'm sorry, I'll try to take it back up. But I needed to understand better the function to have precision control. It's not that either, not that either, not that, not that, not that. I dug inside the code of FFmpeg, because it's open source. Thanks a lot for that. This allowed me to find the function that made the logarithmic distribution I just talked about. By understanding this function, I was able to make it back inside geometry nodes. And this allowed me to don't have to choose between distributions. I could just distort the UVs to go from one distribution to the other. So that way I don't have to choose, neither does the user. Talking about precision control, I'll go back a few steps. Boop, 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 boop. If I can. I can. Yeah. I wanted the user to always know what frequency range he had displayed, so I used a tutorial to display some graduations. I also added a system to delete the graduation I didn't need when the user was choosing the frequency. And for quality of life improvement, I added a merge by distant node to hide graduation when they got too close to each other. I'll go back to where I was. Despite precision control, I wanted the user to have artistic control, because the first intention was to make spectrograms that would fit the mood and the vibe of music. So first, I added a way to smooth the spectrogram. I was very glad when the blur attribute node got added to Blender. I added a way to add back contrast onto the spectrogram. If it's too smooth, sometimes you lose some contrast. So I used the sigmoid function to add some contrast. And finally, I added an equalizer curve to flatten some parts of the spectrogram at will. With all this artistic control, you could either make a spectrogram fitted for a fast and dynamic music, as shown here, or on the contrary, for a slow-paced and gentle music. And now I'll talk about the user interface of the spectrogram, which took most of the time of development because I'm not an add-on developer. I learned it along the way. So I used VS Code to develop the add-on and GitHub to manage the code. Thanks a lot to Jacques-Luc, who made a very good add-on for VS Code for Blender development. This is what the add-on looks like in Blender. It's located in the N panel, so on the right. It's composed of two parts. The main panel allows you to manage all the spectrograms in the scene, to manage the waveforms on each spectrogram, and to manage the volume of all the spectrograms. And below you have the settings panel, when you can change the values and the material of the spectrogram. On the main panel, the creation of the spectrogram is automatic, so you just choose a song, and it generates the spectrogram automatically. You can manage multiple spectrograms, the volume of the spectrograms, and create waveforms at will. In the settings options, you can choose the frequency range, the distribution, and the height of the spectrogram. In the geometry tab, you can better adjust the shape of the spectrogram and the resolution. In the modifiers tab, this is the more artistic control to add the contrast, smoothness, equalizer curve I talked about. You can also deform the spectrogram along a curve. And finally, the overlays tab is simple toggles to display the graduation and the title of the spectrogram. And finally, the material tab, where you can choose to have either the base image texture, some custom gradient presets, or to have a custom material for your spectrogram. The interface is also contextual, so if you have the spectrogram or the waveform selected, you don't have the same settings. For the waveform, you can choose between 4 different waveform types. You can adjust the settings, so the offset, thickness of the waveform. You can also change the resolution and the smoothness independently from the spectrogram to have more artistic control. And lastly, you can choose the color of the waveform. By default, it's simply an emission material. And lastly, I will show you a demo of everything I've just talked about using the song Flower Boy by Flowerhead. Thank you very much. This is not the right version. I made a way better, cooler version, but I guess I made a mistake. So lastly, I'll share some tips that I learned along the way. So firstly, share your work as soon as possible. To me, the valuable input I had from sharing my work was to add presets to my spectrogram. Users would often break the spectrogram by putting wrong values and had no way to get back to a proper setup, so I added presets. Another advice, refrain from using oversized buttons and icons. I did this mistake at first, and I finally understood that the better way to make the interface is to try to make it fit to the UI around it. I often took inspiration from Blender interface to get user interface solutions for my own add-on. And finally, you liking what you do is reason enough to keep doing it. What I mean by that is I often got frustrated and I doubted about my work. At one point, I got really artistically burnt out. I didn't really knew how to get better at what I did. That's one of the reasons I want to share my work. I love what I do, but I'm not a very good artist. I'm a better technician. So I want to give my tool for free to the artists out there for them to try. Thank you, everybody. My tool is available on GitHub. It's called Sound2Mesh, once again. I also have a YouTube channel that I recently started called Sound2Mesh. Thanks to all the wonderful people who supported me. There's a lot that are missing because this is not the final version of my slides, but I thank them nonetheless. Thanks a lot for listening.